war changes people. But sometimes, in the ashes of destruction, we find something worth saving. Sergeant Daniel Reese knew that truth better than anyone. He had been a soldier for almost a decade, hardened by battle and scars, both visible and invisible. His mind had long grown accustomed to the sounds of conflict, the distant echoes of exploding bombs, the screams of dying men, and the constant feeling of being on the edge of a battle that would never end. But there was something about Karis IV, a barren, war-torn planet that had seen more than its fair share of destruction, that felt different. The skies were perpetually shrouded in ash, the ground a maze of craters and burning wreckage. It wasn't just the landscape that struck Daniel. It was the people, or rather, the absence of them. The planet had been home to a peaceful alien race, the Trends, who had been caught in the crossfire of an intergalactic war they had no stake in. The Earth Coalition had come to their aid, but soon found themselves embroiled in a conflict they never anticipated. Daniel's unit had been sent to Karis IV to carry out a standard mission, secure a weapons depot and neutralize any hostile forces. Simple orders. But nothing on this planet was ever simple. As his squad trudged through the remnants of an abandoned Trend village, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and decay, and the silence was deafening. Not even the hum of alien machines could be heard, just the wind whispering through the broken structures. The Trends had been wiped out. His boots crunched against the charred remains of what had once been a bustling marketplace. The heat from the ground radiated up into the air, distorting the already hazy sky. A few of the soldiers muttered under their breath as they moved from one ruined building to the next. As they reached the center of the village, Daniel noticed something strange, a faint sound, like the whimper of an animal. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He motioned for his team to stop. His senses, honed by years of combat, were alert. The others seemed unaware, distracted by the devastation around them. But Daniel's eyes narrowed, scanning the area. The sound came again, louder this time. He followed it, stepping cautiously between the broken walls and debris. It wasn't until he reached the edge of the settlement that he saw it, a small form, curled up in the shadows of a collapsed building. A child. Not a human child, but an alien one. Its skin was a pale green, speckled with faint blue patterns that glowed in the dim light. Its eyes were wide with fear, but despite its trembling body, it didn't make a sound. Daniel's heart sank. The child's chest heaved with shallow breaths, and its small hands were wrapped around a piece of cloth, as though clinging to it for comfort. He knelt down slowly, not wanting to startle it. The rest of his team was still behind him, unaware of the discovery. Daniel's fingers brushed against the child's cheek. It flinched, but didn't pull away. "Hey," Daniel whispered, his voice soft. "It's okay. You're safe now." He didn't know why he said that. The words felt empty, hollow. The reality of the situation was that this child, this alien child, was a survivor of something far darker than he could comprehend. He had seen entire species obliterated by the war, but never a child left behind like this, alone and scared. He looked around, searching for any signs of other survivors. There were none. The village had been completely destroyed. The child was the only one left, abandoned in the wreckage of a conflict that wasn't even its own. Daniel's mind raced. The orders were clear: secure the area and neutralize any hostile forces. The child wasn't hostile, but it was an alien, potentially dangerous. The same mindset that had been drilled into him since he first picked up a rifle now told him that this child could be a threat, that it could be a weapon in the making, something that could turn on him when he least expected it. But when he looked at the child, he didn't see a weapon. He saw fear. He saw someone in need. His hand hovered over his communicator, ready to call in for reinforcements. But something in his gut stopped him. He couldn't do it. He couldn't just leave this child here, abandoned and alone. He had seen too much death, too much pain, to turn his back on something so innocent. His mind raced, trying to calculate the risks, but in the end, his heart made the decision for him. "Come with me," Daniel said gently. He extended his hand, his fingers brushing the child's. The alien's eyes met his, wide and uncertain, but it didn't pull away. Instead, it clutched his hand with surprising strength, as if it had been waiting for this moment. He helped the child to its feet, lifting it carefully. It was light, fragile, like something that had never known safety. Daniel's eyes flicked to the rest of his team, still oblivious to what was happening. They were scanning the area, searching for enemies, unaware that the real threat was not something they could see. Daniel felt a pang of guilt as he led the child away, but he pushed it aside. The child needed him, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to combat. The child looked up at him, its eyes full of curiosity and trust. It didn't speak, but Daniel could see the question in its gaze. Why? Why are you helping me? Daniel didn't have an answer. He didn't know why he was doing this, but he knew that he couldn't just walk away. Not this time. As he made his way back to the transport shuttle, the weight of the decision settled heavily on his shoulders. The child's life was now in his hands. There was no going back from this. He didn't know what the future held, or whether the child would ever be safe. But for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The years that followed Daniel's fateful decision to take in the alien child on Karis 4 were not easy. He carried the weight of that choice with him every day, knowing that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. When they returned to Earth, the child, whom he had named Azar, was treated as a refugee, an alien, and, to many, a potential threat. But to Daniel, Azar was something else entirely. A symbol of hope, of humanity's ability to rise above its darkest moments. At first, the child was a mystery. Azar didn't speak, at least not in any language Daniel could understand. It communicated through strange gestures, odd sounds, and a kind of energy that seemed to ripple in the air when it was near. But it wasn't long before Daniel realized that Azar wasn't just a survivor of a war-torn world. It was something more. The child had abilities that defied all human logic. Azar could sense emotions in a way that seemed almost supernatural. It could read the air, the tension in a room, and the feelings of those around it with an accuracy that was both astonishing and unnerving. It was clear that Azar wasn't an ordinary alien. There was something ancient, something vast, buried within it, a power that Daniel could only begin to understand. But the world wasn't ready for a being like Azar. Earth was still recovering from the scars of the war, and the idea of harboring an alien species, especially one that could potentially hold untold power, was not something most governments were comfortable with. Daniel became Azar's protector. He was stationed at a remote military facility, far from the eyes of the public, tasked with ensuring that Azar remained a secret. The child's existence was classified, a matter of national security. Daniel's superiors were wary, even fearful. They didn't trust Azar. They saw only the unknown and the potential danger it posed. But Daniel wasn't just a soldier now. He was a father, in every sense of the word. He saw the child not as a weapon, but as a person who had lost everything, just like he had. In those early years, Daniel spent countless hours with Azar, teaching it about human culture, trying to break down the language barrier, and most of all, trying to make the child feel safe. Azar's eyes, once full of fear and uncertainty, slowly began to soften. It wasn't easy, but they formed a bond that transcended species and language. Daniel would tell Azar stories about Earth, about the things he loved, about the small joys of life that made it worth fighting for. And slowly, Azar began to understand, its ability to communicate growing as the years passed. But the world outside was changing. The war, though seemingly over, had left deep scars. There were those who still believed that humanity had been too soft, that they had given up too much to an alien child. The powers that be began to fear what Azar could become. Some in power saw it as a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode. Others viewed it as a weapon, a tool that could be used to reclaim lost ground in the galaxy. The whispers of fear grew louder, and Daniel could feel the walls closing in. He knew that one day, Azar would be tested. And he feared that day would come sooner rather than later. The first true test came when a new alien race, the Vrosk, arrived on Earth. They were ruthless, merciless conquerors, intent on expanding their empire across the galaxy. They had been monitoring humanity's progress, and they had heard rumors of a child with powers beyond human understanding. They were curious, and more than that, they were interested. They saw Azar as an opportunity, a weapon to use in their own campaigns. They sent emissaries, sleek ships that glided through Earth's atmosphere, bearing a message: surrender Azar, or face annihilation. Daniel had seen the Vrosk before. He had fought them in battles that still haunted his nightmares. The Vrosk were ruthless, and their technology was far beyond anything humanity had encountered. But this time, it wasn't a battle he could fight with weapons. It was a battle for Azar's life. The threat was clear: Azar was to be handed over, or the Vrosk would destroy Earth. Daniel didn't hesitate. He knew what he had to do. He gathered his team, trusted allies who had stood by him for years. Together they made a plan, one that was as risky as it was desperate. They would not surrender Azar. They would fight. And if it came to it, they would die to protect the child who had become their family. In the days leading up to the inevitable confrontation, Daniel spent every moment with Azar. They talked, and for the first time, Azar spoke back. Its voice was strange, alien, but there was a clarity in its words. "You are my protector. I will protect you," Azar said. The child's voice, though broken and fragmented, was filled with a sense of urgency and determination. Daniel looked at the child, his heart swelling with emotion. It was no longer the fragile, terrified being he had found on Karis 4. Azar had grown stronger, more aware of the world around it. But it was still a child, and the weight of what was coming was heavy on both of them. The Vrosk made their move, arriving in orbit with a fleet far larger than anything humanity had ever seen. The war had begun again, but this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about protecting everything they had built, and most of all, it was about protecting the life of the child who had become their hope. Daniel stood with his team in the war room, staring at the holographic displays of the incoming Vrosk fleet. The battle ahead would be nothing short of catastrophic. They were outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered. But there was one thing they had that the Vrosk didn't: the will to fight, the will to protect. As the first waves of enemy ships began to descend toward Earth, Daniel turned to Azar, who stood quietly by his side. The child's eyes glowed faintly, its energy pulsing with a quiet strength. "Are you ready?" Daniel asked. Azar looked up at him, its expression one of quiet resolve. "I am ready." And with that, Daniel knew they would fight until the very end, for Azar, for humanity, and for the future of both. The battle was about to begin, and there was no turning back. The battle had erupted in full force. Earth's skies had become a war zone, filled with the screeching sound of weapons discharging and the explosion of ships tearing through the atmosphere. Daniel's team, working alongside the remnants of Earth's military forces, were desperately trying to hold back the overwhelming Vrosk fleet. The odds were insurmountable, and the enemies seemed to be everywhere, yet humanity fought back with a fierce determination. In every explosion, every strike, there was the undeniable will to survive. Amidst the chaos, Daniel found himself at the heart of the conflict, leading the charge alongside his team, but his thoughts were constantly with Azar. He had made a promise to the child: no matter what, he would keep it safe. As the battle escalated, the intensity of the situation became clear. They could not defeat the Vrosk with brute force alone. Their technology was light years ahead of Earth's capabilities. What they needed was a game-changer, something to shift the tides of the battle in their favor. Azar, in its silence, had become an enigma to everyone but Daniel. The child had powers that had only recently started to surface, powers that Daniel couldn't yet fully understand. It was as if the alien child was connected to something deeper, something older, and the world around it seemed to bend to its will. The alien energy that had first made Azar seem so otherworldly now began to come to the forefront, as if it were awakening. The child had a sense of purpose now, more than ever. Daniel had no doubt that Azar was beginning to understand the magnitude of the threat that hung over Earth, and the responsibility that came with the abilities it possessed. Yet there was still something unsettling about Azar's power. It wasn't the physical force that frightened Daniel, it was the potential for destruction that lay within it. The child had an ancient energy, a power that could either save them or doom them all. As Daniel watched the sky split with another wave of Vrosk ships, he couldn't help but wonder what the child's next move would be. Would it use its abilities to fight, to protect, or would it remain silent, as it had in the past? Was it afraid of its own strength, or was it waiting for the right moment? As the battle raged on, Daniel's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden appearance of a Vrosk warship, a massive craft designed to shred through anything in its path. It was unlike anything humanity had ever seen, sleek, dark, and filled with weapons that glowed ominously. The warship's arrival marked a new phase in the assault. The Vrosk weren't just trying to win, they were trying to break Earth's spirit, to show humanity that they were nothing more than insects in the grand scheme of the galaxy. The attack was relentless. Ships were falling from the sky like burning embers, and the Vrosk seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. Daniel felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The lives of countless civilians, the future of his home, and the survival of his adopted child all hung in the balance. The desperation was growing. His team had managed to hold the line for a time, but they were beginning to run out of options. The Vrosk's relentless assault was wearing them down. It was at this moment, with the Vrosk's invasion nearly overwhelming them, that Azar made its move. For the first time since the battle began, the child stepped forward. Daniel was at the front of the battlefield, trying to organize a counterattack when he felt a strange, pulsing energy surge through the air. He looked up, and there Azar stood, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was as though the child had become one with the very fabric of the battle itself. The energy was palpable, an electric hum in the air that set Daniel's heart racing. Azar's powers had erupted. The child's form seemed to shimmer, and a wave of energy swept across the battlefield, knocking the Vrosk back with an unseen force. It was not a blast of energy, or a physical attack, no, it was something deeper. Azar had tapped into something primal, something ancient. The child's presence had become a beacon of power, a force that emanated from within, shaking the Vrosk fleet to its core. Ships, once unstoppable, were thrown off course by this unseen energy, their technology short-circuiting and their systems failing. The effect was immediate. The Vrosk were caught off guard. They had underestimated Azar, just as Daniel had once feared. The child's power was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Azar wasn't just a pawn in this war, it was a game-changer. But with this realization came a new sense of fear. If the Vrosk hadn't already known the true nature of Azar, they would soon. The child was no longer an innocent alien refugee. It had become a weapon, one that could change the course of the galaxy itself. As the battle wore on, Daniel watched in awe and terror as Azar continued to wield its powers. The child had tapped into something far beyond what they had imagined, an energy that could not only defend but destroy if left unchecked. It was as though Azar was connected to the very fabric of existence, drawing upon a well of power that had existed long before humanity had ever set foot on Earth. It was as though the child was tapping into the power of the universe itself. For Daniel, the fear wasn't in the Vrosk anymore, it was in Azar. He had seen the child grow, seen its powers emerge, but this was different. This was not the Azar he had protected all those years. This was a force of nature, an unstoppable energy. And as much as he wanted to believe that this power could save them, he couldn't shake the feeling that it could just as easily destroy them all. The Vrosk began to regroup, their tactics shifting. They knew they had underestimated Azar, and now they were determined to break it, to eliminate the threat that the child posed. The battle was far from over. As the Vrosk closed in once more, Daniel realized the true nature of the fight they were in. It was no longer just a battle for Earth, it was a battle for Azar's soul. Would the child, with all its unimaginable power, be used for good? Or would it become a weapon of destruction, a force that could obliterate everything in its path? Daniel didn't know, but he was ready to do whatever it took to protect Azar, even if it meant sacrificing everything he held dear. The final moments of the battle were drawing near, and Daniel's resolve had never been stronger. He would not let Azar become a casualty of this war. No matter what it took, he would stand by the child he had sworn to protect. Years passed, and the memories of that war began to fade, but not for Daniel. For him, the events of the battle with the Vrosk remained as vivid as if they had happened only yesterday. The world had changed. Earth had healed from the scars left by the invasion, but the quiet aftermath carried its own weight. Azar had become something more than just an alien child to Daniel. It had become a symbol. A symbol of hope, but also a symbol of immense power. Over time, the child had grown, no longer the fragile being he had once cradled in his arms, but a young entity with abilities that defied human understanding. Azar had never asked for the power that surged within it. It hadn't chosen to be the harbinger of destruction, nor had it asked to be the instrument of humanity's salvation. It was an innocent, unwilling to bear the responsibility of the gift, or curse, it carried. Yet, the energy within it was undeniable. The world, now aware of Azar's true nature, had begun to treat it like a weapon, even if they refused to acknowledge it fully. The alien child was kept under constant observation by governments and military organizations, all too aware of the dangers that could arise should Azar lose control. Despite the unrelenting gaze of those around it, Azar tried its best to live a normal life. Its humanity, or what remained of it, wanted peace, a life away from the endless battles that had defined its earliest years. It grew up in a world of luxury and surveillance, surrounded by experts and scientists who studied every aspect of its existence, trying to understand what made it so powerful. But Azar's mind was never at ease. The quiet hum of its own energy, which it had learned to control, always echoed in its thoughts. It had learned to push it down, suppress it, to be as human as possible. But the child, now a young adult, knew the truth. It could never truly be one of them. Not when the power inside it was so vast, so dangerous. Daniel, now much older, continued his role as Azar's protector. He had become a mentor, guiding the young being through the complexities of their existence. But even with all his experience, he could not ease the weight of the responsibility Azar carried. His own love for the child had only grown over the years, but so had his fear. Fear that the day would come when Azar's power would break free once again, and the consequences would be beyond their control. It wasn't that Azar had become evil, far from it. The child, in its core, still wanted to help, still wanted to protect. But it didn't understand the full scope of the energy within it. It didn't understand that with every burst of power, the world was pushed further to the edge of destruction. One fateful day, Azar went missing. Daniel had been called to a quiet military facility, where a new threat had emerged, one that none of the human defense systems could track or comprehend. A mysterious alien vessel, unlike any the world had seen before, had appeared on the outskirts of Earth's orbit. It was cloaked in a manner that rendered it invisible to even the most advanced scanners. This alien species, the Jarath, were rumored to be capable of manipulating both space and time. They had come with a singular goal: to find Azar. The Jarath had heard of the child. They had known of Azar's power for years, but they had never dared to approach Earth, believing the human species would protect it. Now, however, they saw an opportunity to harness Azar's energy for their own purposes. They had waited until Azar had reached its peak potential, knowing that the child's abilities had reached a level where it could no longer be ignored. Azar's presence was a beacon to them, a promise of unimaginable power. The Jarath believed that if they could control Azar, they would have the key to unlock the universe itself. Azar had always been able to feel the presence of others like itself, but when the Jarath came, it sensed an overwhelming pull, a call it could not ignore. The young being left the compound where it had been kept, driven by a force it couldn't understand. The allure of what lay beyond Earth's borders called to it, whispering promises of knowledge and freedom. Daniel, upon learning of Azar's disappearance, knew what it meant. It wasn't just the child's disappearance that frightened him, it was the fact that Azar had chosen to leave. It had not been taken, not forcibly abducted, but had gone willingly, as though something had drawn it to them. It was as if Azar had decided that its destiny lay beyond the safety of the planet, that the world it had come to know as home was not enough to contain the power it wielded. The realization sent a chill through Daniel's heart. He understood, more than anyone, that Azar was not just a child. It was something far greater, and its power could change the very fabric of existence. The world was thrown into chaos as the Jarath began their search for Azar. No one knew where the child had gone, and the once constant vigilance that had surrounded Azar grew weaker. Governments and military forces scrambled to track down the alien presence, but it was futile. Azar, now more aware of its power, had hidden itself away. But the world's desperation to reclaim the child was clear. People who had once seen Azar as a savior now feared it, and there were whispers of turning it into a weapon, using it to protect Earth from the unknown enemies that lurked in the stars. As Daniel ventured across the galaxy in search of Azar, he encountered the echoes of civilizations that had fallen before the Jarath. Entire worlds had been consumed by their thirst for power, worlds that had once been vibrant with life but now lay in ruins. Every civilization they touched had crumbled beneath their will. The Jarath were ruthless conquerors, but what troubled Daniel most was the knowledge that they had no understanding of the true consequences of controlling a force like Azar. It wasn't just a weapon to be wielded. It was a child, a being that had been raised in love, and who now carried a power that could tear the universe apart. Daniel understood, perhaps more than anyone else, that Azar was not meant to be controlled. It was meant to be free. It wasn't just about saving the child. It was about saving Azar from itself, from the weight of its own power. It was about preventing a catastrophe that could end all life as they knew it. The journey to find Azar was not one of just survival. It was a journey to understand the nature of power, love, and the responsibility that came with it. Daniel's mission, as he ventured into the unknown, had become something far more profound than a rescue mission. It had become a quest to safeguard the future, not just of Earth, but of the universe itself. And in that moment, Daniel realized the truth. He was not just fighting for the child. He was fighting for the very soul of the universe. Years had passed, but the ache in Daniel's heart never dulled. The search for Azar had led him across distant star systems, each day pushing him further into the vast unknown. He had faced hostile aliens, traversed dangerous planets, and endured countless trials, but his mission had always been clear: find Azar, save Azar, protect Azar from those who would exploit its power. As the years had gone by, his quest had become less about the child he had once saved and more about the larger battle for control over the universe itself. The Jarath, a race of ancient and ruthless conquerors, had learned to manipulate the very fabric of space and time. Their technology was far beyond anything humans had ever seen, and yet, they were driven by a singular desire: the immense power that Azar possessed. They did not understand the child's humanity, nor did they care for the complexities of its existence. All they saw was a source of boundless energy, a key to unlock the secrets of the cosmos. But Daniel understood better than anyone. Azar was not just a weapon, not just a tool to be wielded. It was a living being, a being who had once trusted him and whom he had promised to protect. And now, as he ventured deeper into the darkness, Daniel realized that he was fighting not only for Azar's survival but for the survival of the universe itself. The further Daniel traveled, the more he began to understand the true nature of Azar's power. It was a force that transcended simple energy. It was alive, sentient, and capable of reshaping reality itself. The child, in its innocence, had never truly comprehended the full scope of what it could do. The power that surged within it was not just destructive. It was a force of creation, capable of molding the very fabric of the universe. But with that power came a terrifying truth: if Azar were to lose control, if its power were ever to be unleashed without restraint, it could tear apart the very foundation of existence. The universe could be reduced to nothing but chaos, consumed by a force it could not understand or stop. Daniel's search had taken him to distant galaxies, through dead worlds, and into the heart of ancient civilizations that had long since fallen to the Jarath. Each place he visited revealed more of the truth about Azar's potential. He had encountered others who had once known Azar, scientists, diplomats, even soldiers, who had witnessed the child's growth and development. They all spoke of the same thing: the growing power, the subtle shifts in Azar's behavior, the signs that it was no longer the innocent child he had saved all those years ago. And yet, despite the fear that Azar's power had instilled in them, there was a shared belief that the child was still capable of good, that it had not fully embraced the darker side of its nature. There was still hope. But hope was fleeting, and time was running out. As Daniel journeyed through the stars, the Jaroth grew more desperate. They had caught wind of his search, and they knew that the longer Azar remained free, the greater the risk that they would lose their hold on the child's power. They were relentless, sending their fleets to hunt him down, to stop him before he could reach the child. But Daniel refused to turn back. Every fiber of his being told him that he had to find Azar, that he had to ensure its safety, that the universe depended on it. The pursuit led him to the edge of known space, to a place where no human had ever ventured before. It was a region of space so warped and twisted by the Jaroth's manipulation of time that even the most advanced navigational systems couldn't track him. Here, in the heart of this vast, uncharted region, Daniel found something he never expected, a beacon, a signal that seemed to call to him, a signal that had been left by Azar. The realization hit him like a wave. Azar had left him this message, this final clue, to guide him to where it had hidden itself. The signal was faint, but it was there. It was as if Azar had left a trail for him to follow, a path that only he could walk. And so, Daniel pressed on, following the whispers of the signal, knowing that he was drawing closer to the moment of truth. The Jaroth were closing in, but he couldn't stop now. There was no turning back. The fate of the universe hung in the balance. As he arrived at the source of the signal, the truth became clear. Azar was waiting for him, but it was not the child he had known. The years of hiding, of struggling to control the power within, had taken a toll. Azar had come to terms with its destiny, but it had also accepted the terrible cost of that power. It had become something more, something beyond human comprehension. It was both human and not, a being caught between worlds, between the realms of creation and destruction. The reunion was not what Daniel had expected. There were no tears, no joyful embraces. Instead, there was a silent understanding between them, a mutual recognition of the weight of what was about to happen. Azar knew that its time had come, that it could no longer hide from the power within it. It had to face the consequences of what it had become, and it knew that Daniel would be the one to help it through that process. But the Jaroth were not far behind. As they descended upon the planet, they unleashed their full force, their weapons capable of tearing apart entire worlds. The battle that ensued was nothing short of catastrophic. Daniel and Azar fought together, but the odds were overwhelming. The Jaroth were relentless, and the very fabric of reality seemed to bend and warp around their presence. In that moment, as the universe itself seemed to fracture, Azar made a choice. It understood the true cost of its power, understood that it could never again allow itself to be a weapon, that it could never again allow itself to be used as a tool for destruction. With a final, heart-wrenching decision, Azar chose to sacrifice itself, to sever the connection between its own existence and the destructive force it carried. The explosion of energy was unlike anything Daniel had ever witnessed, a blinding flash of light that tore through the cosmos and left nothing but silence in its wake. Azar was gone. The power that had once threatened the universe was now no more, its energy dispersed into the very fabric of space-time. The Jaroth, their plans shattered, fled into the depths of space, their ambitions crushed. The universe had been saved, but at an unimaginable cost. Daniel stood alone in the void, the silence of the aftermath settling around him. Azar was gone, but its legacy remained. The child he had saved, the being who had once been so fragile and innocent, had become a force for good, a symbol of sacrifice and hope. And in that moment, as Daniel looked up at the stars, he knew that Azar's story would live on, not as a tale of destruction, but as a reminder of the price of power and the strength of the human spirit. The universe had been saved, but the loss was profound. Daniel knew that he would never forget the child he had once saved, the being who had changed the course of history. Azar's sacrifice had not been in vain, it had paved the way for a new era, one where power was no longer a tool for destruction, but a force for creation. And though the stars might one day fade, the legacy of Azar would burn brightly, a beacon of hope for all who would come after.